Today I want to talk about discouragement. I don't know if anybody here has ever felt discouraged. You're probably thinking, no, preacher, that's for those people out in the world. All of us, we're living our best lives now, preacher. So if that's what you're thinking, just try to pretend what it would be like to be somebody who gets discouraged. Just try to imagine and just try to identify with the other people that might understand what discouragement's about. Today I want to talk about that. And we're going to look at the Old Testament. We've got a lot of scriptures to read, but it's a good story. It's a good reminder. As a matter of fact, the text we're looking at is a reminder, really, of what the people of Israel had already been through. It's kind of retelling the story, looking back at it. And in Deuteronomy chapter 1, beginning with verse 21, we'll read these words. Deuteronomy 1, beginning with verse 21, says this, Behold, the Lord thy God hath set the land before thee. Go up and possess it, as the Lord God of thy fathers hath said unto thee. Fear not, neither be discouraged. And ye came near unto me, every one of you, and said, We will send men before us, and they shall search out the land, and bring us word again by what way we must go up, and into what cities we shall come. And the saying pleased me well, and I took 12 men of you, one of every tribe, and they turned and went into the mountain, and came unto the valley of Eshcol, and searched it out. And they took the fruit of the land in their hands, and brought it down to us, and brought us word again, and said, It is a good land, which the Lord our God doth give us. Notwithstanding, ye would not go up, but rebelled against the commandment of the Lord your God. Ye murmured in your tents, and said, Because the Lord hated us, he brought us out of the land of Egypt, to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites, to destroy us. Whither shall we go up? Our brethren hath discouraged our hearts, saying, The people is greater and taller than we, and the cities are great and walled up to heaven. Moreover, we have seen the sons of the Anakims there. Then said I unto you, Dread not, neither be afraid of them. The Lord your God, which goeth before you, he shall fight for you, according to all that he did for you in Egypt before your eyes. And in the wilderness, where thou hast seen how that the Lord thy God bare thee, as a man doth bear his son, in all the way that ye went, until ye came to this place. Yet, in this thing ye did not believe the Lord your God, who went in the way before you to search out the place, to pitch your tents, and fire by night, and to show you what way ye should go, and in a cloud by day. And the Lord heard the voice of your words, and was wroth, and sware, saying, Surely there shall not one of these men of this evil generation see that good land which I swear to give unto their fathers, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh. He shall see it, and to him I will give the land that he hath trodden upon, and his children, because he hath wholly followed the Lord. Also the Lord was angry with me for your sakes, saying, Thou also shalt not go hither. But Joshua the son of Nun, which standeth before thee, he shall go in thither. Encourage him, for he shall cause Israel to inherit it. Moreover, your little ones, which ye said should be a prey, your children, which in that day had no knowledge between good and evil, they shall go in thither. Unto them I will give it, and they shall possess it. But as for you, turn you, and take your journey into the wilderness, by the way of the Red Sea. Let us pray. Our great God and Heavenly Father, we thank you for your holy word. We thank you for the encouragement that you give us. Father, forgive us for when we forget how you've led us along this far. Father, help us to be faithful. Help us not to be discouraged by the world around us. But Father, help us to listen to your voice and to follow your lead, and to be of good courage in all things. We thank you most of all for Jesus, and it's in his most precious and holy name that we pray. Amen. Amen. This is a story of discouragement. Now in this story, we see that the children of Israel are told to go into the promised land. This is the land that they were promised. This was their destiny. This was their birthright. And God wanted them to go up and advance into the land and possess it. And of course, they sent out the spies, and as the kids' song says, 10 were bad and 2 were good. 10 came back with a bad report saying that the enemies there are strong, we can't defeat them. And Joshua and Caleb came back with a good report and said, it's a land flowing with milk and honey, let's go up and possess it. What did the children of Israel do? They listened to the voices of discouragement. They didn't encourage one another. You notice in that text, God tells Moses to encourage Joshua, because he's going to lead the people, and God tells Moses to encourage Joshua. What's it mean to be discouraged? It means to have your courage taken away. And the children of Israel were discouraged. They were afraid. And what did it cost them? They wandered in the wilderness for, somebody tell me, how many years? 40 years. Until that whole generation was dead. And the young people, as he says in this text, who didn't know what right from wrong, they went in to possess it. Now think about that. Think about what discouragement cost the people of Israel. Think about what discouragement cost the people of Israel. Now the young people got to possess it. Now in the text, Moses reminds them that this generation, this younger generation, who you were afraid were going to be killed, they're going to be the ones who possess the land. As a matter of fact, if we look in the book of Numbers, as this story is unfolding, in Numbers chapter 14, verse 1, and all the congregation, Numbers 14:1, and all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron. And the whole congregation said unto them, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God that we had died in this wilderness? Wherefore hath the Lord brought us into this land, to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be prey? Wherein it would be better for us to return to Egypt. And they said unto one another, Let us make a captain, let us return into Egypt. Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation, the children of Israel. And Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh were there with him, and searched out the land, and they rent their clothes. And they spoke unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, The land which we have passed through to search it is exceedingly good land. If the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into this land, and give it us that land that floweth with milk and honey. Only rebel not against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land. For they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them. The Lord is with us, fear them not. But the congregation bade stone them with stones. You get that? The congregation bade stone them with stones. And then what happened? And the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation before the children of Israel. The Israelites said that our children are going to die out here. Our wives and our children are going to die out here in the wilderness. You've led us out here to be slaughtered. And then they picked up stones to stone Moses and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb. And what stopped them from stoning Moses and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb to death? The glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle. That's what stopped them. That's how negative they were. That's how much they turned against Moses and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb, and of course, by extension, God himself. What did it cost them? Can you imagine? You're going to spend the next 40 years of your life wandering around from place to place until you're dead. Recently heard of a man who was involved in some kind of a scandalous activity. It was either political or financial or something. And he's a senior citizen. I mean, he's well in his years. And he was sentenced to so many months in prison. For him, that's a life sentence. You know? You know, imagine the people of Israel. They've got a life sentence. They said, oh, that we died here in the wilderness. Guess what? They got their wish. They did die in the wilderness. That whole generation. What did discouragement cost them? It cost them the promised land. Discouragement cost them the promised land. Let that sink in. Today I want you to realize this. We can avoid the terrible fate of rebellious Israel. We can avoid the terrible fate of rebellious Israel. And today we're going to look at 3 lessons on how to avoid discouragement. 3 lessons on how to avoid discouragement. The first lesson is this. Lesson number 1, God is good. Remember that little prayer? It's actually in the New England Primer, that book that our founding fathers learned to read and write out of. It said a good prayer, a good grace before meals. It says, God is good, God is great, now we thank Him for our food. That goes back hundreds of years. And that's the first lesson, that God is good. Now, they had forgotten that God is good. What did they say? What was the first thing that they said when they began to murmur to one another in their tents? In Deuteronomy 1:27, and ye murmured in your tents and said, because the Lord hated us, He brought us forth out of the land of Egypt. Did you ever hear a spoiled child? Mom and Dad says, no, you can't have that. You just hate me. You just hate me. Why can't I have what I want? Here's rebellious Israel. They said, the Lord hates us. That's why He brought us here to kill us. He hates us. Now, what's that remind you of? Spoiled child. Do you really believe that? You know what is always, I don't know the proper word, fascinating, amazing, dumbfounding, astonishing. If you think about all that Israel had been through, the 10 plagues on Egypt, 10! Each one aimed at an individual Egyptian deity. Remember, we did a series on that, or a sermon on that. Each one aimed at a particular Egyptian deity. God brought His wonders upon the land of Egypt and upon Israel. And Egypt was smitten by these various curses, and Israel was spared. What about the parting of the Red Sea? That's a good one. All these things that God had done for them up to this point. And you would think they'd begin to learn that God's on their side. But here they were, and their first response was, God hates us. Some people view, and I've talked about this ad nauseum, but some people view God as arbitrary and capricious. That He's just this divine trickster up in the clouds who's wanting to pull the rug out from underneath of you and laugh the first chance He gets. That's how some people view God. Even today, people of Israel were no different. God is just random and capricious, and He can't be trusted. He just hates us. That's why He brought us out here in the wilderness, to lead us to slaughter against a bunch of pagans. Excuse me. They've forgotten that God is a good God. That simple lesson. God is good. You know, in the book of Hebrews, it talks about faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. Hebrews 11:6 says this, for without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he that cometh to God must believe that He is, and that He is the rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. Number one thing in pleasing God is to believe that He is. That means that He exists. And that He is the rewarder, the just rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. That He's a good God. That there is a God and He's good. A loving God. That's number one. That's foundational. That's fundamental. If you don't get anything else about God, get the fact that He's a loving God. That He's a good God. That's the starting point. If you don't get anything else, if you just start with that, eventually everything else will fall into place. That God is a good God. In the book of Luke, chapter 11, verses 10 through 13, we read these words. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and him that knocketh it shall be opened. For if a son shall ask bread of any of you that is a father, will he give him a stone? Or if he ask a fish, will he give him a serpent? Or if he ask an egg, will he give him a scorpion? If ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more shall your heavenly Father give the Holy Spirit to them that ask him? You know, God, when he delivered the people out of Egypt, they didn't leave with the shirts on their back. You know that? They lived 400 years in slavery. They didn't have anything. They didn't even have straw to make bricks with. Remember when Pharaoh took the straw away? They didn't have anything. They didn't have a pot, as the old expression goes. But when they left Egypt, they didn't leave empty-handed, did they? They left with the plunder of Egypt. When they made that golden calf at the foot of Mount Sinai, where do you think they got the gold from? They left with the plunder of Egypt. Look at all that God had done for them. God is a good God. That's lesson number one. That God is good. They were discouraged. They'd forgotten that God is good. The second lesson is this. That God is great. You believe that God is great? They could see his greatness. They could see his power on display. In the book of Jeremiah, we're reminded of these words. Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 17 says this. Ah, Lord God, behold, thou hast made the heaven by thy great power and stretched out arm, and there is nothing too hard for thee. If the God who spoke the heavens and the earth into creation, if he was able to speak that into creation, if he was able to simply say, light be, and all of a sudden there's light, is there anything too great for God? No, the answer is no. He's a great God. He's a powerful God. God is good, and God is great. There's no limit to what God is able to do. Sometimes we forget that. There's the story of the man that had an encounter with Jesus. His son was smitten by this terrible situation. In Mark chapter 9, verse 23, we read these words. Jesus said unto the man, if thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help thou mine unbelief. Jesus said to that man, he said, all things are possible to him that believeth. You know, that God is able. God is not limited. We're limited. We're finite. We're extremely limited. God is not limited. In the book of Mark again, in chapter 10, we read these words. This is when Jesus talks about how hard it is for rich people to get into heaven. And in Mark chapter 10, beginning in verse 24, it says this, and the disciples were astonished at his words. But Jesus answered again and saith unto them, children, how hard is it for them that trust in riches to enter into the kingdom of heaven? It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And they were astonished out of measure, saying among themselves, who then can be saved? And Jesus, looking upon them, saith, with men it is impossible, but with God, but not with God. For with God all things are possible. Now, let's think about why they asked that question. Who then can be saved? When Jesus says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go into heaven. They were astonished out of measure and so, well, who then can be saved? Because if the rich aren't going to heaven, who's going to go to heaven? Because the rich were obviously blessed by God. Have you ever heard meet somebody who was blessed by God and say something like, boy, you must be living right? Have you ever heard people say that? Boy, you must be living right. Because God's blessed that person. And that's how the disciples viewed the rich people. They must be living right because God's blessed them. But Jesus didn't see it that way at all. For Jesus, the riches were a problem. They were a problem. Because people depend on the riches and not on God. You know, riches can be a problem. Material wealth can be a problem. I know what you're thinking. Preacher, I'd like to experience that problem a little bit. I'll bear that cross, you know. Well, you know, be careful what you say. When we think about riches, you don't even have to be extremely wealthy. You don't have to be a Ross Perot or a Donald Trump or a Bill Gates or any other multi-billionaire you can think of. You can just have enough money. You know, really, relatively and comparatively, most Americans are rich compared to most of the people around the world. Even middle-class people in Europe and in Japan, the middle class in America still enjoys a higher standard of living. Okay, if you go to Japan and look at a middle-class family, about the same place where you are in life financially, you'll notice their house is about half as big as yours. And that's just the norm. Same thing with Europe. Even the middle class in this country enjoys a higher standard of living than most people around the world. We think about riches. You know, what's the problem with having riches? What do rich people lack? Well, Jesus points it out. The first thing they lack is spiritual awareness. They don't need God. They depend on their riches for what they need. They don't have to cry out and ask God for anything. They just go out somewhere and write out a check. So a lot of rich people lack that spiritual awareness. And Jesus says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go to heaven. Not because of the riches, but because so many times they depend on the riches. What else might rich people lack? How about common sense? Have you ever known somebody just inherit money, just come into money, and never really have to struggle with anything in life and never really have to think real hard about anything? Everything was just, kind of paid for them. And they just lack a lot of common sense. Let me put a question to you this way. Have you ever known a family where the old man starts up a business, hard work, sweat of his brow, builds that business into something, and the next generation comes along who's grown up with the business and just runs it into the ground? Then a lot of times the third generation has to come along and build the business back up again. Why? Because that second generation doesn't appreciate the effort and the time and the sweat and what it took to build what they grew up with. And they lack that common sense. I'll tell you something else that a lot of rich people lack is toughness. You know, if you've been through the school of hard knocks, you have a certain amount of toughness. And there's a lot of people in this world that have never had to go through the school of hard knocks. And when they do have to face the hard times, they sort of crumple like a cheap suit. They lack toughness. What's another thing that the rich people lack, I think, that Jesus is talking about? I think we can see this, is gratitude. Gratitude. If we don't appreciate the author of all good gifts, the giver of all good gifts, as the book of James calls him, if we don't appreciate God, you know what? We lack gratitude. And let me tell you something about people that lack gratitude. They're the most miserable people in the world. And the people that have an attitude of gratitude, they're the happiest people. I mean, they might not have much, but they're thankful for what they've got. Are you thankful for what you've got today? Well, I might not have much, but I worked for every bit of it. And I'm thankful that I was able to work, and I was thankful that I was able to get a job, and I'm thankful for what I've got. You know, that's the attitude we ought to have, an attitude of gratitude toward God for the abilities and the things that He's given us life and the opportunities. We'll talk about that more later. Third lesson is this. God is good, God is great. Lesson number 3, don't forget it. Don't forget it. A lot of times the people of Israel have this attitude. Well, what have you done for me lately? Have you ever known somebody like that? They have that attitude. What have you done for me lately? You know, again, you look back at all that Israel had experienced up to this point, And it seems like they're saying, well, yeah, God did this and God did that, but what have you done for me lately? I think a lot of people have that attitude today. They forget all that God's done for them so far. The psalmist puts it this way, Psalm 103, beginning with verse 1. Psalm 103, beginning with verse 1. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgiveth all thine iniquities, and healeth all thy diseases, and redeemeth thy life from destruction, who crowneth thee with loving kindness and tender mercies, who satisfieth thy mouth with good things, so that thy youth is renewed like the eagles. The Lord executeth righteousness and judgment for all that are oppressed. Did you get that verse 2? Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. You know, the people of Israel had forgotten. Here they were, think about this. Talk about snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. You know, a lot of people are experts at that. They're experts at snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Now that the saying's supposed to go, they snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. You know, that's what we're supposed to do. It's supposed to look grim, and we snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. But a lot of people do it just the opposite. They're good at snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, and that's what the people of Israel did. They were this close to the promised land. This close to the land flowing with milk and honey. And instead of boldly entering in, they wanted to stone Moses to death. They snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. Forget not all of his benefits, all that they'd been through. God had been with them all this way, and here they had forgotten this. How heartbreaking. Be this close to your final destination, this close to your final goal, this close to the promised land. And it's not going to happen. You are going to die in the wilderness. If you're afraid of dying in the wilderness, you wish you'd rather died in the wilderness than at the hands of the Amalekites and the Anakites and the Anakim and all the other kites and ites and Jebusites and Thisites and Perizzites and Madazites and everything else. They wanted that. They're afraid of that. Well, they will die in the wilderness. Don't forget. You know, folks, God has something good in store for us. God has something good in store for us. There's a favorite verse of a Christian brother of mine. It's 1 Corinthians 2:9. It says this, but it is written, eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither hath entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. You know, God had prepared a land flowing with milk and honey. You know, when they would go into that land, they didn't have to plant vineyards. The Anakites and the Perizzites and the Jebusites and the Amalekites had all planted vineyards and olive groves and trees and gardens and built cities. All they had to do was go in, drive them out, and possess what was already there. When they left Egypt, they took the plunder of Egypt. They could have went into a land flowing with milk and honey with the plunder of Egypt and been set up for life for generations. Been a rich, wealthy kingdom on the face of the earth. From a nation of slaves to a wonderful world kingdom in one generation. But they didn't. See, they had that slave mentality. You know that they had that slave mentality. They'd spent 400 years in slavery. They'd seen all those miracles that God had performed in the wilderness, but they still had this mentality. They still had this heart. We're just slaves. We should go back to being slaves. That's what we know. We can't do it. You ever see people discouraged? We can't do it. Sometimes the preacher or the elders or somebody try to get the church to do something. Try to get them a vision of what can be accomplished. They say, well, we can do this. And, oh, we can't do it. We can't do it. And you say, why can't we do it? And you get the 7 last words of the church. You know what the 7 last words of the church are? We've never done it that way before. We can't do it. Why? Well, we've never done it that way before. The people of Israel, who were supposed to go and possess the promised land, oh, we ought to go back to being slaves. That's what we know. Think about this. The Israelites were not defeated out of the promised land. They were discouraged out of the promised land. Not an arrow was shot. Not a sword was drawn. Not a drop of blood was spilled. The Israelites were not defeated out of the promised land. They were discouraged out of the promised land. You know, I think a lot of people kind of have this attitude, and sometimes I think it's a good attitude to have. I'm going to die trying. Have you ever heard people say that? I'm going to die trying. The Israelites, they didn't have that attitude. They weren't defeated out of the promised land. They were discouraged out of the promised land. You know, the devil, he doesn't need to defeat us if he can discourage us. He doesn't need to come at us as the roaring lion if he can approach us as the angel of light and simply discourage us. Well, you don't want to try to do that. Your neighbors might think you're a religious fanatic. You don't want to try to do that. People might not understand it. Or you don't want to try to do this. It might be a stumbling block to somebody somewhere. And the devil can appear to the church as an angel of light and discourage us from advancing the kingdom of God. Are we going to be like the Israelites? You know, Moses in his life, and when he gets to the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32:11, he describes how God's been with him, and he says this. Deuteronomy 32:11 or 12 says this. As an eagle stirreth up her nest, and fluttereth over her young, and spreadeth abroad her wings, and taketh them, and beareth them on her wings. So the Lord alone did lead him, and there was no strange God with him. Moses says, just like that mother eagle takes care of the little eaglets, that's how God has led me and taken care of me my whole life. He's provided for me, he's taught me, he's led me, he's been there for me the whole time, and I'm going to be faithful to him. Folks, I want you to think about this. You know, it's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to get discouraged. There are sources of discouragement all around us. At one time I heard the preacher say, call them the negative, what do you call them? Let me think here. The nattering nabobs of negativism. You ever hear that phrase? Remember a guy used to say that all the time. The nattering nabobs of negativism. But you know, when I look back on my life, I kind of feel like Moses. I can look at this point in my life and say, well, God led me here. This didn't have to turn out that way. It could have turned out another way. And I get to this point in my life, well, this didn't have to happen. It could have happened another way. And I get to this point in my life, well, God answered that prayer right when we needed that prayer answered. In all the big things in my life, God has been there the whole way. Of all the things of eternal importance, God has been there with me through my life the whole way. So I have to ask the question, why would he stop now? You know, don't forget it. Don't forget it. God is good. God is great. And don't forget it. I want you to think about that this morning as we turn to our hymn of decision.